Guten Tag, WAP. Let's make history today. This is Mr. Winiger. We're going to go over Unit 5, Day A. Let's make history today as we go over Unit 5, Day A. So let's get started with our daily punishment. We're going to spend the next 2 days going over the last unit, contemporary period. Did you hear about the cheese factory that exploded in France? There was nothing left than debris. Because brie is cheese. Oh, it's so funny, and I love cheese, so it's even better. This video will cover the early 20th century revolutions, World War I to World War II, 1900 to 1945. Let's start off with World War I. World War I will be between the Central Powers, Germany, Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungarian Empire versus the Allied powers, France, Britain, Russia. Later, Italy and Japan and America will join the Allied powers. The big causes of World War I was mania. You have long-term causes like militarism, alliance system, imperialism, and nationalism. What causes the war is when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the Prince of Austria-Hungarian Empire, is assassinated. The Serbian military, Black Ops, knew about it and they supported the assassination. Austro-Hungarian Empire is going to go to war with Serbia. Russia is going to try to protect Serbia. It causes a domino effect that leads to World War I. World War I will be fought in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the Balkan area, Africa, and the Pacific. It's going to be using trench warfare in the Western Front. That's going to be the bloodiest area. In the Eastern Front, the Germans will start to defeat the Russians until the Russians have a revolution in 1917 and they get out of the war. Colonies will be used as labor and as soldiers in World War I. In the home front in World War I, you will have rationing. You'll have propaganda being used with like short videos and posters. You'll have, in America, you'll have voluntarism where people are not forced, but they're encouraged to like not eat meat on Mondays, meatless Mondays, to build their own gardens so vegetables can go directly to the troops overseas. You'll have bonds being sold to allow the governments to make money. America will get involved in World War I in 1917 because of unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmerman Note. The Germans try to block the British blockade by using submarines. They do sink some neutral ships like the Lusitania, even though the Lusitania was a British ship. It had American passengers in it, but they were secretly holding weapons there. Germany promises to stop doing submarine warfare in 1915. In 1917, they're starving, so they start doing submarine warfare again. They sink a couple American ships. America's going to declare war on Germany. They also find out that Germany secretly sent a telegram to Mexico asking Mexico to attack the United States. In return, Germany would make sure that Mexico got back the land they lost in the Mexican-American War. Woodrow Wilson was very naive and idealistic. He made 14 points of what he wanted the world to look like after World War I ended. The 14 points, it was very like, no secret alliances, freedom of the seas, let's get rid of all armies and navies, let's have a new League of Nations where all countries could hold hands and sing Kumbaya. None of those things will be really passed in the Treaty of Versailles, which will try to punish Germany. The Treaty of Versailles will, Germany will lose land. They'll give up all their colonies. They have to have an army of only 100,000. They give up their Navy and Air Force. Germany has to sign a clause saying that they were fully responsible for World War I because the Central Powers lose World War I. This is going to lead to a lot of resentment, and the Treaty of Versailles will help lead to World War I, to World War II. The only thing that really stuck in the Treaty of Versailles, which Wilson wanted, was the League of Nations. However, the League of Nations was kind of trash. It had no army to actually enforce power, and America is never going to join the League of Nations. The isolationists are going to take power in America, and American Senate will never ratify the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, let's talk about some of the colonies. Egypt was promised self-government. They will not be given it. They're going to rebel against the British. Eventually, the British will give them independence in the 1920s and 30s. The Ottoman Empire will be broken up into countries like Turkey and stuff, which will become a secular constitutional republic. A lot of these Arab countries rebelled against the Ottoman Empire during World War One. They were promised independence. The British and the French will break that and stab them in the back. Instead, they'll do mandates because they were not ready to govern themselves. And the British and French will prepare them for independence. Some Middle Eastern countries will be given independence during this time. India, during this time, during World War One, will try to remain neutral. Mahatma Gandhi tried to do a period of non-support but non-violence during World War One. There were more radical people like B.J. Talak who wanted to do violence against the British. Muhammad Ali Jinnah was another independence leader of the Al-Muslim League. The Indians were promised things after World War One, but the British did not follow through. So once you get to the 1930s, the Indians are going to start to do more and more civil disobedience to push for independence. This is where Gandhi starts to do his Salt March. They do his boycott on British textiles, the homespun movement. And this is really when you start to see the Indian independence movement kick into gear in like the early 1930s. The period of the 1920s was a period of cultural development. You have new music like jazz, new art, Dadaism, Expressionism, Cubism. You do see the rise of totalitarian in the 1920s and 30s. You have fascism develop in Italy with Benito Mussolini. Nazism will develop in Germany with Adolf Hitler. Fascism in Japan with Hideki Tojo, were really the generals in charge. Joseph Stalin, and communism in Russia. In Britain, which was not totalitarian, they will develop the British Commonwealth. The white dominions are basically given full independence, except for economic policy with tariffs and foreign policy. Russia will have a series of revolutions in 1917. They'll have the Liberal Revolution under Alexander Kerensky in February 1917. That will not be successful. He keeps Russia in the war. The big slogan in the Russian Revolution was peace, land, and bread. And he does not really do a lot of land reform, and he keeps Russia in the war. So in October-November 1917, the Bolsheviks will seize power in the communist or Bolshevik revolution. Under Vladimir Lenin, he will do things like war communism, where they'll create a modern army under Leon Trotsky. They'll start requisitioning food in war communism, where they just take over food to feed their army, the Red Army. They'll create their own secret police, the Cheka, during this time. After the war ends, he will allow some capitalism in Russia and the new economic policy. Under Lenin, they create the Constitution of 1923, which makes Russia, I guess, technically a democracy, even though there's only one party and you can't vote, only communists can vote. Like they allow one election. The Bolsheviks did not become the majority party, and then they shut down all elections. Stalin will become ruler in 1925. He's going to exile Trotsky. He's going to make Russia even more totalitarian. He's going to collectivize the farms. He'll start purging and killing his own opponents. He'll create a 5-year plan to industrialize with Russia. Mexico is going to have a revolution from 1910 to 1920. Their slogan was Tierra y Libertad. The Mexican Revolution was fought for different reasons in different regions of Mexico. Zapata was fighting for Indian rights. Pancho Villa was fighting at first with the support of America, although the Americans will betray him and he'll start to invade America and attack them. It was originally started because of the corruption of Porfirio Diaz and the fact that he was just rigging elections and bribing. Madero should have won the presidency, but had it stolen from him. At first, they will overthrow Diaz and Madero will become the president of Mexico. He'll be then assassinated by Victoriano Huerta. The Mexicans will revolt again. By 1917, the Mexicans will create their constitution, the Mexican Constitution of 1917. The revolution will end by 1920. You'll have the big political party El PRI develop in Mexico, which will be the major political party in Mexico. Mexico will be a one-party state. It wasn't like you would get killed if you were another party. They would just rig elections. Mexico will start to industrialize. They will be economically successful during this time. China will also have a revolution. China will have the revolution of 1911, led by Sun Yat-sen, who wanted to modernize. He's going to eventually form the Kuomintang, or Nationalist Party, which was kind of a little fascist. After he dies, Chiang Kai-shek will lead them. China had a democratic movement in the May 4th movement, which will not be successful. Also, the 21 demands will be passed around 1917, where Japan's just going to take some more land from the Chinese. Because of this, people turn away from democracy in China. They really turn to one or two ideologies: the Guomanyang, extreme nationalism, or communism under Mao Zedong. At first, the Guomanyang and the communists were allied, but then Chiang Kai-shek will attack the communists, and Mao Zedong will escape in the Long March. And China will have an off and on civil war from like 1921 to 1949. You should know about the Great Depression, what caused it, overproduction. The big thing was Black Tuesday when the stock market crashed. Because people were buying on credit and buying on margin, you're going to have bank failure, which was a huge cause of the Great Depression. Countries will start to do tariff wars. You'll have environmental problems like the Dust Bowl in America. It's going to lead to people flirting more with totalitarian governments. The Great Depression is one of the things that led to Hitler. The Nazis will seize power in Germany in 1933. They'll start to persecute the Jews. You have things like the Kristallnacht. Hitler slowly will start to break the Treaty of Versailles. He'll take over Austria in 1938. In 1939, he'll demand the northern part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. The British and French will give it up in the Munich Conference. In return, Hitler promises not to take any more land. 6 months later, he invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. When Hitler invades Poland on September 1st, 1939, they will go to war against Adolf Hitler, the British and French will. The causes of World War II, the big causes are rent, rise of dictators, economic depression, nationalism, and the Treaty of Versailles. From 1939 to 1942, the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were winning World War II. The Germans did blitzkrieg, and they're going to conquer lightning warfare. They're going to conquer most of Western Europe, Norway, Denmark, France, Poland. In 1941, Hitler's going to try to invade Russia. He will get stopped outside of Moscow, and his army is going to slow down. This was a mistake. At first, Hitler had made peace with the Russians because he didn't want to do a two-front war. He did the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. But when he invaded Russia, it will eventually turn the tide. Around the same time, America will get involved in World War II when the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor because the Americans wouldn't trade oil with them anymore. Hitler will also declare war on America, and it's more than he could swallow. The strategy in the Pacific was island hopping, where they would bomb and use their Navy and Air Force to take over strategic islands so they can get closer and closer to Japan. They will win World War II when they nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The turning points in World War II in Europe was Stalingrad, where the Russians defeat the Germans in 1943, and D-Day, where the Americans land an army in France and start to take back France. And Hitler's being attacked on three sides. There's also an Allied army in Italy. Russia will conquer Berlin. Hitler will commit suicide in April 1945. You should know about how the countries used total war during this time. The big changes in the home front with total war, like the factories are creating weapons instead of cars now. You have like propaganda being used during World War II. You have people being arrested for speaking up against the government. The Axis powers in Russia are using slave labor. You have things like rationing during World War II. You have the Holocaust happening. After World War II, you're going to see the rise of non-governmental organizations, NGOs like Red Cross, Amnesty International. You'll have international organizations like the United Nations will be created, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. You will start to see decolonization happen after World War II in Africa and Asia. Women were treated horribly. The Japanese took Korean women and used them as prostitutes, comfort women. Some countries, the Allied countries, will try the major German war criminals in the Nuremberg trials after World War II, and they'll try the major Japanese war criminals in the Tokyo trials after World War II. And this is going to be like the beginning of international courts and international trials for things like crimes against humanity. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. One more video. Until next time, Deuces, deuces, deuces.